How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Living Dead formats where physical media never dies. And we have a brand new collection update video, probably the last video of the year, or at least until after Christmas, because this room took like 15 minutes just to unclutter enough so that I could sit here and record this. This place is going to be filled with Christmas presents for the kids. I feel like this is probably going to be the last video on this channel until after Christmas. Sorry, it just gets crazy around Christmas for us here. No worries, we will continue on after that, and I'm probably going to have a video or two for the Sharp Hand Path channel. So if you want to see a little bit more of me, I will be at that location after this video. Anywho, as you've seen with the title, it's a unusual genre for me to update on this channel, and that is deathcore. So yeah, if you're not a fan of deathcore, I hate to break it to you, but there is a long run of deathcore collection update videos in your near future on this channel. There's gonna be a couple of things sprinkled throughout as well. There's gonna be a punk update, and there's gonna be like a random music update with a couple of like miscellaneous bands thrown in there as well, just to break it up a bit between each deathcore collection update, so it's not too much all at once. I'm going to start with a couple of the more well-known deathcore bands that you're probably aware of if you're into this scene at all. So let's start off with Carnifex. I've got 3 albums by these guys, starting off with The Diseased and The Poisoned, which I'm going to tell you straight up front, this is the best album out of the entire collection update. So if you don't like this deathcore album, you're probably not going to like anything else. But I digress. Let's check out the inside and talk a bit about where these guys came from. So here's the disc. You know I love it because it's green. So it's got the logo there. Not too much going on. Let's see what's behind the disc. Some skulls and whatnot. Fair play. This is quintessential deathcore. I think they took what they did on Dead in My Arms and kind of refined it a bit and made it even more brutal and a little bit more well put together. I'm struggling to really get across how well this album was made after their debut, and very few other deathcore bands can probably hold a candle to this album, especially second album coming out of the gate. Anyway, if you don't know who Carnifex are for some reason, they are a deathcore band that started in 2005, and they hail from California, USA. Besides this and the other 2 albums I'm going to be showing in this video, they also have 6 albums and 3 EPs to check out, so there's lots of material if you dig this project, some varying in taste and varying in elements sprinkled in. This one is your basic MySpace deathcore, lower production, but still really good. The breakdowns hit when they need to, the screams hit when they need to. These guys have a mix of like high vocals and lower vocals. This album just has kind of like the peak era of this era Carnifex. This one's from 2008 and is their second album. There's a couple more to go, so let's check those out. Next up, I skipped one because I already have that in my collection, which is Hell Chose Me, and then I eventually got this, Until I Feel Nothing. I got the slipcover edition, so let's slide that out. There we go. There's the backs. Let's take a look at the inside. More of that creepy swamp girl on the inside, and more skulls. Of course. So this album is a little bit different than Hell Chose Me, and definitely a little bit more different than Diseased and The Poisoned. This one, they went kind of more in a depressing, darker mode. This would be like the depressive black metal of deathcore. So like regular deathcore, and then this would be like the depressive deathcore, I guess. It's a very dark and gloomy and downtrodden type of atmosphere, very bleak, and you're not in for a good time per se with this album, but if you're a fan of deathcore, you're in for a good time regardless, because this one's really good. It's probably the last bastion of decent Carnifex at least for a couple of albums. Yeah, they keep evolving a little bit here and there and dipping their toes into different mini genres in deathcore. And this one was a pretty interesting twist, and I feel like this is where they started adding their like darker, blacker elements. Honestly, this is probably just as good as Hell Chose Me, but in a different way. Hell Chose Me, I think, was where a lot of people that weren't into their early stuff got introduced to Carnifex, but this was a great follow-up, just slightly tweaked and definitely darker. So that was Until I Feel Nothing from 2011, their 4th LP. Moving on straight into their 5th album that followed that one. This is a Digipack edition of Die Without Hope. Interesting enough album cover. It's like another skull, and then we got some sort of like ruby on their head and some kind of evil glow. Here's the back and the track listing. And then the inside flips open like this. There's the band members in question. Close-up of the creepy hand, and then close-up of the skull face, and then the disc. Let's check out what's behind the disc. More of the hand and those like swirling patterns. Try not to find the swastika in there. Try very hard. They're not a sketch band at all, at least not that I'm aware of, so I'm sure that was just coincidence that it looks like a bunch of you-know-what crosses. This album is okay. I obviously much prefer their previous work. The production on this album is way higher. It is almost overproduced in my opinion. This one has more solo stuff. It has more symphonic kind of piano-y stuff going on. The atmosphere seems a little bit more thicker and intense. It doesn't go the darker, gloomy, depressing route that Until I Feel Nothing went, but it's still a little bit more bleak than Hell Chose Me and Diseased and the Poisoned. This seems like they're trying to reach closer to the mainstream, maybe, and try to go that direction. They might have been hanging out a little bit more with some hardcore bands in their tours and maybe got influenced that way. I'm not sure, but this one, I'd give it like a 6 out of 10. It's better than average, but it's not something I'm going to reach for when it comes to Carnifex, at least not at this point. So yeah, that's Die Without Hope from 2014, their 5th LP, and that is all the Carnifex for this collection update. Let's move on to the next couple of albums from the next band. So the next band, going alphabetically I guess, is Chelsea Grin, and these guys were amazing when they started. Chelsea Grin started in 2007. They're, again, deathcore. These guys are from Utah, USA, and besides the albums I'm going to show, they also have 5 other albums and 2 EPs. So what do I have to show today? Well, not the greatest works, but I have Ashes to Ashes. Don't have the slipcover for this. And this one is from 2014. I believe it's their 3rd album. I didn't write it down. Probably should have done that. Here's the back. Apologies for the glare. Interesting artwork. I'll give it that. Like the weird ivory colored face and then the black feathers and the skulls and the tongues and stuff. It's interesting. I'm not sure what they're going for. And then there's even like some wolf mandibles going on. Yeah, this album is definitely different from their usual stuff. This one does some very, not djenty stuff, but it's pretty close to djenty stuff, if not having a couple of djent riffs in there. They are definitely going a more Meshuggah, math metal-y type of guitar tone feel mixed with some hardcore vocals thrown in. The usual vocals for Chelsea Grin is like really high-pitched deathcore screams and growls, and then like the odd like lower sect of growl, maybe a mid-tone growl, but for the most part these are like like crazy crow squawking screams, which maybe that's why the black crow feathers. But it's very touch and go with those vocals in this album, and they definitely lean more into the hardcore side of things, or at least the shouty type of vocals, and that kind of being phased in a little bit more, and them trying to go a more math metal-y core type of thing, and just even more down-tuned guitars, djenty thing going on. I just feel that it's not the greatest album, and it's probably not one I'm going to reach for. I appreciate they tried something different. I'm not sure if they had the same vocalist as their last 2 or 3 albums or 2 or 3 releases. I really wish I didn't sell their self-titled EP, Jesus Christ, but who knew we were going to be here enjoying Deathcore again in 2024. So you live and learn. But anyways, yeah, what do you think of Ashes to Ashes by Chelsea Grin if you're into deathcore? This one is, I think, again, their 3rd album, because it's Desolation of Eden, My Damnation, and then this one. So this is probably the 3rd album from 2014. It's an experimental album. I don't know if it really works for me. I might have to give it a couple more listens in the future, but right now, this is not the Chelsea Grin I'm going to be reaching for. Let's go on to the next one. The next Chelsea Grin I have in my collection is from 2016. It is the follow-up to Ashes, but it's a completely different sound. This is Self-Inflicted. I like the vibe of this album a lot better than Ashes to Ashes, but it's still not that classic MySpace era Chelsea Grin. I don't know. Again, it feels like they're trying to go more mainstream with this project. They've even dropped their brutal logo in favor of just Helvetica. So I'm not sure what the concept behind this album really was. I do like the idea of self-inflicted, implying that the Chelsea Grin is self-inflicted, or the damage they're doing to themselves or the person on this is self-inflicted. It kind of looks like they're burned or something on one side. They're having a Two-Face from Batman kind of thing. Please, DC, don't make Two-Face a woman. I dug your interpretation of the Penguin for the Dark Crusader or whatever it was, but just stop gender swapping everything. It's not necessary. Anyways, this album, it's got your typical deathcore stuff, but it's also got, again, it has some more hardcore vocals squeezed in there. I don't remember hearing too much of the high-pitched growl deathcore screams that you're used to from Chelsea Grin on this. I'm sure it's in there a healthy amount, but it's not something that pops up in my mind and goes, yeah, they did that a lot in this album. They definitely didn't experiment too much. This was more of a, let's put something out there that's easily digestible. It's still deathcore, but it's still progressive a bit and adds some hardcore, more mainstream elements, but just has a sprinkle of Chelsea Grin flavor in there. I like the vibe of this album a little bit better, and the cohesion of this album a little bit better in comparison to Ashes to Ashes, but this is still not what I'm going to be reaching for when it comes to Chelsea Grin. Let me know what you think of Self-Inflicted from 2016, their, I believe, 4th album. Moving right along, because I don't know how much time I have left to record this video without too much noise. Quickly get this out of the way. Emure is something that I got introduced to early on when I was a little bit late my teens, early 20s, and I got introduced to them through the album after the one I'm going to show. But the album I have to show from Emure is the Respect issue, and I can tell you right up out of the bat that this is not not my thing. This is very bland, cookie cutter deathcore. A lot of chug, open chug, 01, 01, 01, 01, 01 type of fretwork with just very blasé vocals that don't leave any sort of memory in your head. It doesn't make you come back for anything. It's a very run-of-the-mill, paint-by-numbers type of deathcore, especially for Emure. Their personality hasn't shone through yet. This isn't their new metal mixed with deathcore days. This isn't deathcore meets Korn yet. It doesn't have that kind of thing going on for it. It's a very just meat and potatoes with less meat sometimes. Deathcore, there's none of the songs on here or riffs on here really stick out in my mind. There's a song called Dry Ice that I believe is a instrumental, and even then it's not that memorable of an instrumental, and none of the songs on here pop out in my mind and say, hey, remember me? This is a pretty forgettable Emure album in my opinion. But yeah, it's their 2nd album, and it's from 2008, so it is sort of MySpace era. I have a feeling their 1st album is probably better than this. I'm gonna have to go check that one out. Good luck probably picking up a physical copy ever, but I at least want to go listen to it and see if it's a little better than this one. I give this maybe a 3.5 out of 10. It's very lackluster deathcore, and not something I'm probably going to reach for on purpose in the near future anytime soon. Let's move on to one that introduced me to the band. This one is Ymir, Speaker of the Dead. I didn't get the slipcase, unfortunately, but it is what it is. This at least has kind of like inklings of what they're going to be eventually. There's like, hey, we might have a personality eventually and stick out from all the other like Whitechapel wannabes. Not really much behind the case there, or the disc. There's an advertisement for Dr. Acula, which is a far better band. Holy moly. This one is all right. This one starts going on to like 5 out of 10, 5.5 out of 10. There's at least a couple of songs on here that have some riffs that you're like, oh yeah, that's good. I think Drug Dealer Friend, near the end of it, starts getting pretty good. That intro, Children of Cybertron's pretty memorable. And I think Solar Flare Homicide has a pretty interesting riff in it. I'm gonna have to listen to this maybe a time or two more. This one's from 2011, and it's their 4th album. Probably the one that a lot of you got introduced to Ymir with. Let me know what was your first Ymir album, and if for whatever reason you don't know who Ymir are, again, deathcore, but they also later on sprinkled in some elements of nu metal, so that's kind of neat. They started in 2003, so they started way before a lot of these other bands did, which is surprising. They have an album before their first album that was a demo album, but there's like 12, 13 tracks on it. And then I think there's 2 other EPs before their first album, or 2 other demos with an EP length of songs on them. And they come from Connecticut, USA. And besides these 2 albums that I just shown, they also have 6 other albums and 1 studio EP. But yeah, they've got like 2 or 3 demos and a full length demo before the first album. So if you're interested in these guys, maybe check out their past, see what you like, and you know, come back to me and tell me what I should be listening to by Ymir. Apparently their latest album is their best album, according to a couple of the people that I've seen on YouTube. The last artist on here is a bunch of Whitechapel. Hands down, this is the best one out of what I'm going to show you. This is Exile. This is their 2nd album, probably the one that everyone was introduced to. At least this was my introduction to Whitechapel. The self-titled track, This Is Exile, was pretty good. There's the disc there. And that creepo in razor wire is behind the disc. Pretty cool. Yeah, this one's just honestly a classic Whitechapel album. Possession, This Is Exile, Somatically Incorrect, Of Legions, and None That Long. Messiah Bolical at the end, I think, is the 7-minute long track. Yeah, this one, excellent. This is Whitechapel's Disease and the Poison for me, for sure. The Somatic Defilement's pretty good, but then they really refined their sound in this one. So yeah, it's their 2nd album from 2008. Let's move on. The next one I have on this is their self-titled from 2012. There's the back. Not really much. You'd think this album would be called The Mark of the Blade because giant blade symbol on the front. Nope, it's just self-titled Whitechapel from 2012. There's the disc. Saw blade, pretty cool. And then their logo. Not too much behind, just a continuation of the art from the side flap there. So this one is pretty good. It continues on their evolution from the new generation or the regeneration. I don't know. I'll have it here, whatever this album was. But yeah, it's kind of a continuation of that in this, and slightly heading towards the next album. It's definitely the perfect in-between album from their 3rd album and the next one I'm going to show. So this is still pretty good, not quite peak Whitechapel, but honestly, this wouldn't be a terrible place to start if you just randomly haven't heard of Whitechapel, which, let me get you up to speed. Whitechapel started in 2006. They are out of Tennessee, USA, but they also have elements here and there of prog and groove, aka post-thrash metal, because groove doesn't exist. Things can be groovy, but groove metal is not a thing. Sorry, it's post-thrash. Now that we got that settled, good place to start, but honestly, I would probably start at This Is Exile, but I wouldn't fault you if you decided to check this one out. Self-titled Whitechapel from 2012, their 4th album. All right, moving on to where they kind of start to dip in quality and their experimentation goes a little wonky. This one is okay. This is still like a 5 out of 10 for me. This is Whitechapel with Our Endless War. A lot of people have this at the very bottom of their list, if not second bottom. Honestly, The Saw's the Law, excellent track. Diggs Road is good. Blacked Out is really fucking good. Psychopathy's okay. Worship the Digital Age is a little repetitive and kind of cringe at times, but they have a pretty good riff somewhere in there though. Like, I remember liking it. I think Rise and Our Endless War were pretty satisfactory opening tracks. So yeah, it's one of those albums where it's like, it had potential and I see where they were going, but it was mostly like hardcore, more inspired deathcore with some slight noodly elements if I remember correctly. And I think they're trying to go a little bit more melodic as well. It's hard to remember some of the things between this and the next album. I don't know if I showed the tray. Let's show the tray. So this is what's behind the tray, a blacked out US flag. And yes, this is still like a 5 or 5.5 out of 10 for me. There's some bangers on here, but there's also some really lows. There's some mountains and some valleys going on with this album, even throughout specific songs. Luckily, I got a couple of bonus tracks on this. This has A Process, So Familiar, and Fall of the Hypocrites. Didn't realize I had those on here. So cool bonus tracks on here. If you're interested in this album, there is a version of it that has a couple of tracks added on as well. Maybe it's the Digipack version, and if you get the jewel case one, maybe you don't have those extra tracks. Hard to say. Let's move on to the funniest way to end this video, really. The worst album, apparently, by Whitechapel, and that is 2016's Mark of the Blade. Again, this ended up on the bottom of a couple of people's list of Whitechapel albums ranked, and I can see why. You know, it's a really big departure from their early stuff. This is very hardcore, kind of focused, and maybe even like Slipknot-y sounding. There's a lot of Slipknot similar style riffs on here, and even the way Phil Bozeman's rough cleans kind of sound like Corey Taylor here and there. So I'm like, man, did they tour with Slipknot a little bit too much before they released this album? Because yeah, you can definitely hear something in there that may have been inspired by Slipknot and some hardcore bands. There's a couple of alright tracks on here though. Mark of the Blade probably being one of the better ones. I don't mind the elitist ones. It gets a little cringy here and there for lyric wise, but honestly, that's not too bad. I think Venomous was also a pretty good track, and A Killing Industry had some good ideas in there, had some interesting lyrics, but it also got kind of cringy as well, and I think a little bit repetitive. So this is definitely not the one to start off with if you're going to start listening to Whitechapel for deathcore reasons. It's a little tame, it's a little more mainstream, and it feels like they tried to add hardcore and Slipknot elements into it that just doesn't scream Whitechapel, except obviously Phil Bozeman being front and center, but not your typical Whitechapel, and probably not the one I'm going to reach for when I reach for Whitechapel albums. So that's it. That is my first stack of deathcore albums that are now slowly funneling into my collection. Expect, again, a lot more where that came from in the near future, probably after Christmas. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully I haven't annoyed too many people by having some deathcore on the channel. I know a lot of black metal fans are probably seething right now because, oh, this used to be a black metal channel. Oh, you know, where's the brutality? Where's the cultness? We all go through certain phases in life of what we like, what we enjoy. We try to experiment with our listening habits, and I've just kind of gone through a time in my life where deathcore was something that I felt was missing from my collection, and I gave away a lot of it in the past, and now I regret it, and I'm trying to just make up for that hole in my collection. So you'll have to excuse me if it's not quite your thing. Hopefully we have some fans on this channel that understand and maybe are also enjoyers of deathcore and don't hate it too much. Let me know how you feel about it one way or the other in the comments section though. I always read the comments and try to answer everyone. And if you've made it this far, maybe subscribe, because there's still, I think, over 50% of you who watch this channel that aren't subscribed. So yeah, pat yourself on the back if you made it this far, press the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video. This has been the Living Dead Formats, where physical media never dies, and remember, they can take down streaming, but they'll never take our discs. See you next time.